Steel bars, concrete walls, ice-cold water. Alcatraz was engineered to be escape-proof, a federal prison built for inmates too dangerous for anywhere else. Isolated on a windswept island, surrounded by freezing currents and layered security systems, it was designed so that no one would ever leave. And yet, in 1962, 3 men vanished from their cells, never to be seen again. To understand how Alcatraz was constructed, what life was like inside, and how 3 brave prisoners managed to escape, we rebuilt the entire island in 3D, exactly as it operated at its peak in the 1950s, piece by piece, even down to the complex mechanical system that controlled every cell door. Alcatraz Island is a small, rocky outcrop with little vegetation, stark, unforgiving, and isolated. The name Alcatraz derives from Isla de los Alcatrazes, meaning Island of the Pelicans, a title given in 1775 by Spanish naval officer Lieutenant Juan Manuel de Ayala, who first discovered it. It sits roughly 2 kilometers offshore from San Francisco, surrounded by the chilling waters of San Francisco Bay, measuring about 500 meters long and 180 meters wide. Long before it became a federal penitentiary, the island served another purpose. In the mid-19th century, as San Francisco expanded rapidly during the California Gold Rush, the first major developments took shape. A lighthouse and Fort Alcatraz, a coastal military fortification designed to guard the bay. By the early 1860s, the island took on a secondary role as a military prison, a function that steadily expanded over time. Around 1910, the upper levels of Fort Alcatraz's old citadel were torn down, and a new cellhouse, the structure we see today, rose above its former basement level. That underground space would later become known as the infamous Dungeon of Alcatraz. We'll return to that later. The U.S. Army continued using Alcatraz as a military prison until 1933. By then, the federal government was searching for an escape-proof facility, a place to isolate the most problematic inmates and send a clear message amid the surge of organized crime in the 1930s. The existing cellhouse was reinforced with additional security measures and officially reopened as a federal penitentiary in 1934. Not long after, Alcatraz housed some of the most notorious criminals of the era, including Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and Alvin Karpis. By the early 1950s, when Alcatraz was at its height of operations, the facility had a variety of daunting and novel features to keep the prisoners from ever leaving the island. First, the only way onto the island was by boat. The boat dock served as the main access point, tightly controlled, closely guarded, and governed by strict schedules and inspections. Every arrival and departure was monitored. Alcatraz's isolation was its greatest security advantage, but it also made the island incredibly expensive to operate. Every piece of food, fuel, and equipment had to be brought in by boat. And at the end of the video, we'll talk about how costs attributed to the downfall of Alcatraz. Just uphill from the boat dock stood Building 64, originally constructed as Army barracks. During the federal prison years, it was converted into housing and communal space for prison staff and their families. At any given time, roughly 300 civilian residents lived on Alcatraz, making it feel like its own functioning community. Beside Building 64 stood the guardhouse and Sally Port, one of the oldest surviving structures on the island. Originally the guarded entrance to Fort Alcatraz, it was also the location where the island's first military prisoners were held. Next to it stood the Officers Club, a social and recreational center for the officers and their families who lived there, an unexpected contrast to the rigid confinement only steps away. Moving toward the northwest corner of the island stood the Quartermaster Warehouse, a 4-level structure used for storage and workshops. Large white letters spelling Alcatraz were painted across its roof, a navigation marker visible to pilots flying overhead. Adjoining it was the powerhouse, supplying electricity to every building on the island. Nearby stood the Model Industries Building, a 4-story structure dating back to the U.S. Army era. It housed workshops and laundry facilities where inmates worked, which was considered a privilege. In 1939, a newer structure, the New Industries Building, was constructed beside it, and the laundry and workshops were transferred there. Climbing higher, we reached the water tower, which stored potable water imported from the mainland. The island had no natural fresh water supply. Next to it stood the most recognizable structure on Alcatraz, the Cellhouse. A 3-story building, approximately 130 meters long, and one of the longest reinforced concrete structures of its time, was where inmates were confined for years at a time. Directly adjacent was the recreation yard, an enclosed outdoor space where inmates could exercise and socialize under supervision. Yard access was typically permitted on weekends and holidays. From here, prisoners could look out across San Francisco Bay, their freedom visible but unreachable. Next to the cell house stood the warden's house, a large residence serving as the official home of the prison warden and his family. Beside it rose the island's lighthouse. When the new cell house was built, a taller concrete lighthouse replaced the original, and it still remains active today. At its base stood the lighthouse keeper's house. Finally, in the southeast corner lay the parade ground, a large flat area that provided additional housing for prison staff and their families, including 3 apartment buildings, 1 duplex, and 4 cottages for senior officers. Now, let's move inside the heart of the prison, where steel, concrete, and routine were engineered to break any hope of escape, at least for most. The cell house was divided into 3 sections: the cell room, the north wing, and the south wing. The cell room formed the main body of the structure. This vast 2-story building contained 4 separate 3-tiered cell blocks, identified as blocks A, B, C, and D, totaling 504 cells. Containing 126 cells, A block retained its original military prison configuration and was not retrofitted during the 1934 conversion. No inmates were permanently housed there during the federal prison years, and several cells were even used for storage. Together, containing 336 cells, blocks B and C were upgraded during the federal conversion and housed the general inmate population. Each cell was meant for only 1 prisoner at a time, measuring just 1.5 meters wide by 2.7 meters deep. The inside of the cells can only be described as minimal and bleak, with just a bed, a sink with cold running water, a toilet, a small desk for writing, and 2 shelves along the back wall for personal items. Separated from the rest of the cell room by a concrete wall was D block, the segregation unit. Containing 42 cells, this newer section was completed in 1941 and used for disciplinary isolation. Here, privileges were severely restricted. Inmates could be confined to their cells for up to 24 hours per day. 6 of the lower cells, known as the hole, were the harshest. Solid steel doors blocked all light, leaving occupants in total darkness. At the south end of D block stood the library, containing approximately 15,000 books. Reading became one of the primary pastimes for inmates confined to their cells. Prisoners could not visit the library. Instead, books were delivered directly to them. At the north end of A block was the barber shop, where inmates received a monthly haircut. The corridors connecting these cell blocks had nicknames, small traces of personality inside an otherwise rigid system. Along the outer wall of A block ran Sunrise Alley. Between A and B block was Michigan Avenue. The pass between B and C block was called Broadway, and between C and D block was known simply as CD Street, with the space in front of the library called Park Avenue. And inside D block, the isolation unit, the corridor was known with cruel irony as Sunset Strip. These familiar street names echoed faintly inside one of the most controlled environments in the country, reminding prisoners of a distant past life. Running through the center of each cell block was a narrow utility corridor containing all the plumbing lines for the cells. Each inmate cell had a vent in its rear wall that opened directly into this space, an overlooked detail that would later play a crucial role in the prison's most famous escape. And because Alcatraz is as iconic as it is unforgiving, we turned this entire reconstruction into a detailed poster of the island at its peak. Grab yours through the link in the description. Every purchase directly supports the channel and the team behind it. We're also giving one away. For a chance to win one, like this video, subscribe, and comment below. What surprised you most about the prison? We'll announce the winner in the next video. And a quick shout out to our last giveaway winner. Congratulations! Beneath the tiers of cells, another space waited. Quiet, utilitarian, and deceptively ordinary. The cell room basement was accessed by a set of stairs that opened into a large open space dominated by a communal shower. Shower heads suspended from overhead pipes above a concrete floor bordered by a raised curb. Inmates were required to shower twice a week. The water was deliberately kept warm to prevent inmates from acclimating to the cold water. Keep that detail in mind. Finally, next to the shower was the clothing issue station, where inmates received their clothing after bathing. But in another area of the cell room, also hidden below the concrete floor, beyond the reach of daylight, was a second, more nefarious basement, known as the Dungeon of Alcatraz. As the former basement of the old citadel, the corridor running around its outer perimeter had once been the citadel's dry moat. In the early years of the federal prison, this space was used for disciplinary isolation. Inmates were escorted down the stairs in A block and confined in basement isolation cells for several days. Then, they were brought back up through the D block stairs and placed into segregation. To the rest of the prison population, it appeared as though those men had vanished below for months. The impression served as a powerful psychological deterrent. By the late 1930s, this area was no longer used for confinement. After that, it served primarily as storage. Up next, the north wing extended from the main cellhouse building. On the ground floor was the dining hall, also known as the mess hall, where inmates and prison staff ate their meals together. The corridor leading to it was nicknamed Times Square for the large clock mounted above the entrance. Since nearly the entire population gathered here at once, the dining hall was considered the most dangerous space in the prison. Directly beyond it was the kitchen, where meals were prepared. Above the dining hall and kitchen was the hospital, isolated from the rest of the prison. It provided medical and dental care not only to inmates, but also to prison staff and their families. Inside were examination and treatment rooms, an operating room, and medical offices. At one end was a recovery ward, accessed through a secured gate. It was divided into barred sections, each holding multiple beds for inmate patients. Moving on, the south wing was the smaller of the two wings, but it was one of the most important because it controlled access into the prison itself. On the ground floor was the main entrance to the cellhouse building. It also held the prison's administrative area with several offices, including the warden's office and the armory, where correctional officers' weapons were stored. And to reach the actual prison area, the cell room, you had to pass through a fortified sally port guarded by the armory with bullet-resistant glass. It separated the administrative side of the building from the prison side. Across from the armory, the control room we see today wasn't originally part of the layout. It was added in the late 1950s. Just past the sally port was the visitation room, where family members could meet with inmates. These visits were strictly non-contact. Inmates and visitors were separated by thick glass and they spoke through a telephone. And it's important to note that visitation wasn't guaranteed. Inmates had to earn that privilege, and even then, only one visit per month was permitted. Outside of the visitation room was the main gate leading into the cell room, along with stairs that led up to the second floor. Up on the second floor was a small auditorium that served as both a film screening room and a chapel. Again, earned privileges, not rights. This level also included a room for correctional officers' general use. Finally, let's talk security and how a few overlooked details led to some of the most notorious prison escapes of all time. To start, Alcatraz wasn't secured by a single barrier. It was protected, layer after layer, by natural and man-made barriers intended to prevent escape. Let's start with the cells themselves. 3 of each cell's walls were solid concrete. The fourth side, the front, was barred with hardened tool-proof steel specifically designed to resist cutting and tampering. The cell doors also worked differently from traditional locks. Instead, they were operated remotely by a central mechanical system that could open or close individual cells, or up to 15 at once. And remarkably, the entire system was fully mechanical. No electricity, just levers, gears, and linkages. Here's how it worked. Above every door was a tamper-proof steel enclosure. Inside that housing was the mechanism that controlled that specific door. Each door rode along a fixed rail using 2 wheels. Attached to it was a coupling link that could pivot up or down. The position of that coupling link was controlled by a sliding bar fitted with wedges, aligned with both ends of the door. When the sliding bar shifted, one wedge forced the coupling link upward, allowing it to engage with pawls on a long shifter bar running along the top of all the doors on the tier. Once engaged, any lateral movement of that shifter bar drove the coupling link, and that movement opened or closed the door. As the door traveled, the coupling link stayed raised as it followed a fixed guide. Then, a roller mounted on the door struck a pivoting arm, returning the sliding bar to its default position. When the door reached the end of its travel, the coupling link reached the end of the guide and dropped by gravity, locking the door securely in place. The doors were operated using 3 levers inside a control box located at the end of each tier. The first lever was the door selection lever. This selected which door would be operated. When actuated, it raised or lowered a vertical bar inside the control box. A position indicator mounted on that bar aligned with markings inside the box, clearly showing which door was selected. Each door was identified by a numbered position, from 1 up to 15, depending on the tier, plus an additional A position for selecting all doors simultaneously. At the top of the vertical bar was a toothed rack segment. This engaged a pinion gear, rotating a long horizontal shaft running along the top of all the doors on the tier, the same way the sliding bar did. Mounted on the shaft above each door were 2 radial bits. One bit maintained the same angular position for all doors and was used to open every door at once. The second bit was angularly offset relative to the first, with a unique offset for each door, allowing individual doors to be selected. The second lever was the clutch, which enabled the selected door or doors. When actuated, it pushed the shaft forward. Each door's sliding bar included a perpendicular tab. When one of the bits on the shaft aligned with that tab and the shaft was pushed forward, the bit drove the sliding bar laterally, engaging the coupling link with the pawls on the shifter bar and enabling that door. Using the first and second levers together, officers could enable all doors at once or repeat the process to enable multiple specific doors. The third and final lever was the door operating lever. When actuated, this large lever translated its motion into the shifter bar, physically moving all enabled doors open or closed. This entire sequence had to be repeated each time the doors were opened or closed. And that was just the beginning. Inside the prison area, inmates were counted 13 times per day to ensure no one was missing. Every exterior window and opening was secured with tool-proof steel bars. Electromagnetic metal detectors were installed in key areas of the prison, along with remote-controlled tear gas canisters in areas including the dining hall, a space where several riots occurred throughout Alcatraz's history. At both ends of the cell blocks, elevated and barred walkways served as gun galleries. Armed officers patrolled these galleries, watching the corridors from above. And crucially, these walkways were accessible only from outside the cell room, meaning inmates could never reach them. Outside the cell house, the recreation yard was enclosed by 6-meter walls topped with fencing and barbed wire. A catwalk ran along the outer perimeter and was patrolled by armed officers anytime inmates were allowed outside. A guard tower stood next to the yard, while additional towers surrounded the rest of the complex. Each was equipped with searchlights and manned by officers carrying high-powered rifles or machine guns. And beyond all of that was the prison's ultimate obstacle, a psychological and physical barrier unlike anything at a mainland facility: the water. With powerful currents and chilling temperatures, typically around 10 degrees Celsius, the chances of making it very far are already slim. Then, once you factor in the 2-kilometer distance from shore, the task of successfully escaping becomes nearly impossible. In fact, during its operation as a federal prison, there were 14 escape attempts involving 34 inmates, with 2 of them trying twice. Nearly all were caught or did not survive. But there were 3 men, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, who seemed to vanish into thin air, and to this day, their fate remains a mystery. What we do know, however, is that their escape was made possible through meticulous planning and the exploitation of specific vulnerabilities. Over 6 months, they expanded the vent openings in the backs of their cells, openings originally too small for a man to pass through, using improvised tools. They camouflaged their work with painted cardboard covers. On the night of June 11, 1962, after lights out and the head count, they removed the fake vent covers, slipped into the unguarded utility corridor behind the cells, and climbed onto the top of the cell block. Officers believed the men were asleep during the nighttime count, fooled by dummy heads made from soap, toilet paper, and real hair, a deception that went undetected until the following morning. At the top of the cell block, they retrieved the makeshift raft and life jackets they had constructed from more than 50 stolen raincoats. From there, they exited through a ventilator shaft onto the cellhouse roof, climbed down an exterior pipe to ground level, and reached the shore of the island. What happened next remains uncertain. There is no confirmed evidence proving whether they reached the mainland or drowned in the waters that had stopped so many before them. On March 21, 1963, Alcatraz closed its doors after 29 years as a federal prison, not because it failed, but because it was too expensive to maintain due to its isolation. By the late 1950s, it cost nearly 3 times more per capita than any other federal prison, with millions more needed just to keep the aging facility standing. Keeping Alcatraz running had become a financial burden the government could no longer justify. So, the inmates were transferred to other federal institutions, and the island entered a period of uncertainty. Redevelopment proposals came and went until the Native American occupation of 1969 to 1971 helped reshape its future. In 1973, Alcatraz reopened, this time not as a prison, but as a historic site. Today, more than 1 million visitors walk its corridors each year. While Alcatraz was designed to keep people in, another kind of structure was perfected centuries earlier to keep enemies out. We broke down how a medieval castle actually worked in this video, so be sure to check it out. Thanks for watching. Stay curious.